Hello, everybody. Okay, hello, everybody. It's good to see you all here. It's nice that we have this conference that's live online and everybody around the globe can actually access it. We have today we have a speaker, a panelist, Dr. Peter McGrath. He's actually currently a coordinator of the IAP, the Global Network of Science Academics, IAMP, and he's actually with TWAS at the moment. And then he's also currently a coordinator of the Gender in STIE. Okay, he used to be hold a postdoc position in University of Arizona, Purdue University. He received his PhD in applied biology, entomology, did his BSc in University of Glasgow, and we are happy to have him here to talk about science and technology and across the developed and developing countries from the perspective of TWAS. And today we also have Dr. Vani Narita. She's actually a senior officer of Science and Technology Division at the ASEAN Secretariat. Dr. Narita, she's actually a co-founder, CEO of PT Amonra. She also used to be a visiting researcher at University of Helsinki, a consultant for program manager of DP, steering committee for Asia Chapter International Network for Government Science Advice. She had a PhD from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in cellular and molecular biology. She also did her BSc in biochemistry and biology from the same university. So Dr. Narita, she will actually be discussing primarily on the ASEAN perspective, and we are more than happy to have here. So basically, let's start with Dr. McGrath. We're glad to have you here. So you can actually show your screen.
Okay, thank you very much, Siti, for that introduction. And I'm also happy to be here, as you say, representing TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences, and IAP, the Inter-Academy Partnership. And I'll, in my presentation, I'll share my slides now, cover a little bit of the work of both of those on this topic of inclusivity, of course, and how it relates to the diaspora, which is obviously the topic of the conference. I hope you can now see my slides in full screen.
Yes, we can.
No, it's okay. So let me continue. First of all, some quick introductions to the two organizations that I did mention. IAP, the Inter-Academy Partnership, is the global network of academies of science, medicine, and engineering. So these are sort of merit-based organizations that collect together the best scientists in particular countries or regions. As of this month, we have 149 member academies grouped into 4 regional networks. And we think that these academies represent 30,000 leading scientists, engineers, and health professionals with membership in over 100 countries. And I want to focus, because we're talking about this diaspora and inclusivity here, let me talk a little bit about one of the IAP programs. It's called Young Physician Leaders. Medical doctors spend a lot of time learning medicine, not surprisingly, where they're very thankful for that. But as they sort of progress in their career, they're given more and more responsibilities. They have to take on leadership roles, but very rarely, it's starting to happen in some countries, but very rarely do they actually get given training in how to be a leader. So IAP has stepped into this vacuum, if you like, And we invite now a group of about 25 young professional medical scientists to undergo leadership training, usually once a year at the World Health Summit that takes place in Berlin. And you can see here on the screen where a couple of the groups that we have undergone this training in the past few years. The program is now 10 years old, and we have an alumni network of more than 200 excellent young medical professionals who've been nominated by their national academies to join this program. They are now, as you see, connected in an alumni network, and we actually used the COVID pandemic and shutdown to focus them a little more together, and they're now operating much more as an interconnected network, and not just sort of each year, each cohort talking to each other, but now across cohorts, which is something we've been trying to promote for a number of years. So in a way, the pandemic had a little benefit here. Among the training that they get is a session by this guy, Francis de Vericourt. He's a professional trainer at the European School of Management Technology based in Berlin, where the World Health Summit takes place. And he's written this book, Framers, which I can recommend to you. Very interesting, talks about ways of thinking. And he presents this session to the cohort of young physicians that we bring together. But what he does, it's very clever. Before the people arrive for the session, they have to fill in a questionnaire. So he understands where they're coming from, what their experiences are, what their expertise is, all these different things. And he puts together certain groups, deliberately choosing the groups, and he sets them a challenge during the sort of session that he leads. And this is the outcome is always that the group that succeeds best in meeting the challenge is the one made up of the most diverse members, which may seem obvious to us, but it's really interesting to see it in practice. So if you have, let's take the old vision, a bunch of white-haired white men sitting around a table, making decisions for everybody, those decisions will not be the best, the most effective. If you deliberately bring diversity into your group thinking, your group decision making, you will make better decisions and you will succeed in whatever you are trying to achieve much more effectively than letting things happen in, let's say, the old modus operandi. And it's interesting. I've seen this happen now 2, 3, 4 times. Every time he's predicted the group that would be the most effective. So this is one very important point. Let me switch a little bit. Bearing that in mind, the representation in global policy making here, I'm going to jump to the IPCC reports. This is one that came out a few years ago on the little bit prior to the Paris Climate Conference, but really trying to convince the politicians that we need to aim for this 1.5 degrees C of global warming, and that is what the Paris Climate Change Agreement says. Ideally, we meet 1.5 and certainly no more than 2 degrees. Here's the authors of this report, and you can see the different countries they come from here. And just to point out that, as you can see I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, 35% of the authors come from Europe and only 11% from Africa, for example. And you can see a number of African countries mentioned here. 18% from Asia, but only from 3 countries in Asia, China, India, and Japan. So you see here that diversity is it's not a particularly inclusive process. Part of this, of course, is because of the north-south divide in global science that the TWAS is very dedicated to trying to rectify and trying to support scientists in the south, in the developing countries. And this is why, if you like, these things happen. This is I hope you can sort of figure this out. The size of the countries here on this map relates to their global output in science. So you can see the USA is huge. China, actually, this is from a few years ago. China is now producing as many publications as the USA. Europe, also massive. But you see the whole of Africa, with a little bulge for South Africa, is less than the whole of even India, certainly a small European country like the Netherlands or Belgium, producing more science than the whole of Africa. So there is certainly a massive imbalance in global scientific output, and this relates also to government support for researchers. Africa, for example, accounts for less than 1% of global research and development expenditure, only 2.4% of global research publications. And as I've mentioned, TWAS's mission is to support, help build scientific capacity in the developing world. It has a number of programs to do this through research grants, exchange schemes like fellowships, associateships, awards and prizes to elevate people into the public eye, supporting meetings and conferences, and training in science diplomacy. And our chair today, CT, was one of our most recent participants in our science diplomacy course a couple of months ago. Science diplomacy itself is relatively recent at TWAS. We started really in 2011, 2012, but there really is a need for not only scientific research capacity in the developing world, but science diplomacy capacity. Scientists might be working away in the laboratories, but getting their work, the results of their work, known to the either local city governments, regional state governments, and especially national governments, for those decision makers to know that they have expertise within the country they might not be aware of. And these are some of the points that we cover in our science diplomacy training. And again, we've trained more than 200 early career scientists, and we're starting to connect them again in an alumni network. And you just see from this quote from the book here that there's in the case of water management and water diplomacy, rivers, lakes, underground aquifers, they all are transbound, or not all of them, but many of them cross national boundaries. So there is need for science diplomacy to help manage those water resources. But we need 300% increase in the number of water professionals in Africa, for example, and also big numbers elsewhere. So this is where the science diplomacy training comes in. Talking about inclusivity, of course, the subject of gender, of women in science always comes up. Putting back my IAP hat, the Network of Science Academies, we've done 2 surveys on membership of women in academies and the positions they hold in those, whether they're in the governing council, these kind of things, in 2015 and 2020. And we're pleased to report an increase of 13 to 16% as a global average. Of course, that's pretty poor. There are still 19 academies of our 149 members that report 10% or less female membership. We are pushing them to try and adjust that as fastly as they can. There is this idea of young academies that have started to emerge in the past 5 or 10 years. And because these are being sort of born relatively recently, they don't have the long traditions of the senior academies. They are being created with a good gender balance. You see the average is 42%. And hats off, especially to the Cuban Academy of Sciences, which is the leading one for female representation. It's 33%. And this report came with a number of recommendations, and we're trying to follow up on those with IAP, and really to persuade the academies that they have to be role model organizations themselves if they want to push the female women in science agenda. And this is a quote from our IAP co-president. Our policy recommendations, you know, that IAP is promoting science for policy. Our recommendations can be considered inclusive only if academies represent the full diversity of their communities. And this comes back to that initial workshop at the young physician leaders that I mentioned. The best advice, the best decisions are taken with the more diverse groups. Coming to the end of my presentation, to touch on another group, we've had a project going on for a couple of years now between TWAS, IAP, and the International Science Council, ISC. It's called Science in Exile. Really looking at the plight of displaced and refugee scientists. These are people that are really going out into the diaspora, of course, hopefully staying connected to one another. But support for these people, especially for scientists to maintain their progress in scientific or teaching careers or medical careers, what else it might be, is rather fragmented and varies from country to country. It's not bad in Europe or the USA, but it could be much better. And part of our project is to advocate for improving the situations. We had a launch of a declaration back in April, which was presented by Princess Sumaya El Hassan of Jordan, who is of course also a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador. So this is another project where we're trying to actually this conference on scientific diaspora is sort of a spin-off from this Science in Exile project. And let me finish there, and I'll hand the floor back to Siti. I'll be happy to answer any questions maybe after the next speaker as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Peter McGrath. Appreciate it. Now let's go to our next speaker and panelist, Dr. Vani Narita from ASEAN.
Thank you, Siti. And it's really nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you. Also nice to see Dr. Peter McGrath. Nice to see you. So I will share my screen. Okay, so let me first start with the introduction of ASEAN, just in case some of you are not familiar with ASEAN. ASEAN is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it's established on 1967 in Bangkok, Thailand. And now we have 10 member states. And it's predicted that by 2030, we are the world's largest economy. And in terms of the population, we're also considered as one of the most populated region in the world. I just saw the other world map that Peter just showed on the scientific publications, and it's really interesting. And I think ASEAN also should work hard. We have integrate the gender equality and social inclusion in all of our thrusts. So ASEAN has ASEAN Plan of Action on Science, Technology, and Innovation in 2016-2025 collaboration. So we want to strengthen strategic collaboration among academia, research institutions, networks of centers of excellence, and the private sector to create an effective ecosystem for capability development, technology transfer, and commercialization. And of course, this will include our diaspora around the world and along with our partners. The second thrust is the to enhance mobility of scientists and researchers, people-to-people connectivity, and strengthen engagement of women and youth in STI. So in terms of gender equality, social inclusion, and youth, this is emphasized in Trust 2. The other Trust 3, is maybe can be summarized as an enterprise support. For example, establish innovative system and smart partnership with and other partners to nurture STI applications to raise competitiveness. Just to give you an example, in Trust 3, we are now working on the guideline to adapt to climate change for MSMEs, emphasizing on women-owned MSMEs, the work and science and technology cooperation. For our work, we don't really have a subcommittee that emphasize on diaspora, for example, or on gender, but we are working very closely to another division in our secretariat, which is the Poverty Eradication and Gender division. So when we're working closely with them, we are focusing on the work that in geophysics, material science and technology, until sustainable energy research. So they are spread along the work of ASEAN Secretariat for Science, Technology, and Innovation. And
I think we have lost Dr. Narita. Dr. Narita, are you there? Yeah, I think because of the connectivity, I guess. You there? You still there, Dr. Narita? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I think you dropped out several times. So can you actually proceed probably from a slide or two before? Yeah, sorry.
All right. Can I turn off my camera? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Probably you can share your slide. Yeah, thank you.
So should I start from this slide or one more slide?
Yeah, that's good. This slide's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just want to repeat again that for gender and social inclusion, we are emphasizing on Trust 2, which is talent mobility, people-to-people connectivity, and inclusiveness. And this is This is to enhance mobility of scientists and researchers, people-to-people connectivity, and strengthen engagement of women and youth in STI. The other three tasks, which is shown here, actually still include the gender inclusivity and social inclusivity. For example, we are now working on the gender mainstreaming, the GESI, gender inclusion and social inclusion. So I will just show you the other work that we've done in subcommittees. We have 9 subcommittees: biotechnology, meteorology and geophysics, material science and technology, science and technology, infrastructure and resources development, microelectronics and information technology, space technology and applications, food science and applied technology, marine science, and sustainable energy research. Along the way, we are now working on circular economy and decarbonization. Somehow it's really cross-pillar and cross-sectoral, so we have to work across these subcommittees. Under these subcommittees, we have centers and networks. There are no specific center and network emphasizing on the gender, for example, or social inclusivity, but the mainstreaming of our inclusivity is spread across our centers and networks. We try very hard to, for example, for like any activity that we include at least 30% of women and youth. For centers, we have ASEAN Earthquake Information Center, ASEAN Specialized Meteorological Center, and ASEAN Research and Training Center for Space Technology and Applications, ASEAN Hydroinformatics Data Center, and ASEAN Central Microbial Utilization integrated with NMicro. And these centers work very closely to diaspora around the world. There is no specific diaspora network for science and technology division, but there is a diaspora for health. Due to pandemic, we have that specific diaspora network in ASEAN. For networks, we have several networks, and we would love to expand these networks, of course. The first one is the ASEAN Network for Drugs, Diagnostic Vaccines, and Traditional Medicines Innovation. And during pandemic, we work really hard, I think, to work together in the region as well as around the world with our diaspora. A lot of our scientists around the world actually contacted us and wonder how we can work together. The second network is the ASEAN Network on Microbial Utilization. And maybe some of you are not really familiar, but ASEAN has one of the highest biodiversity hotspots around the world, including the Triangle Coral. The third one is ASEAN Large Nuclear and Synchrotron Facilities Network, and then ASEAN Network of Excellence Center of Biomass Conversion Technology, ASEAN Foresight Alliance. For this ASEAN Foresight Alliance, we work closely with the ASEAN Academy of Sciences. I just heard that TWS has some activities involving young, I would say senior Academy of Sciences and young Academy of Sciences together, trying to look for the futures of ASEAN. Number 6 is ASEAN Young Scientist Network, one of the organizers of the event. And the both co-chairs gave, I think, as a speaker in this session, in this conference. Number 7 is ASEAN Dosimetry Network and ASEAN Technology Transfer Network, ASEAN Metrology Network, ASEAN Network on Weather Modification, ASEAN Network on Metallurgy and Metallic Materials, ASEAN Sustainable and Environment Matters, ASEAN Network on Biomass, and ASEAN Network on Nuclear Power Safety Research. Just for your kind information, due to pandemic, we're also accelerate the digital transformation and sustainable development in ASEAN. So we just endorsed the digital transformation roadmap, the implementation of circular economy, and now we are working on the decarbonization related to the climate change, the 1.5 degrees Celsius that we want to achieve together. So in terms of working together with partners, we have 11 dialogue partners. So full dialogue partners, the one that I circle over here is our full dialogue partners. Canada, United States of America, UK, EU, Russia, China, India, Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And then we have 6 sectoral dialogue partners. These include Turkey and United Arab Emirates, and 4 development partners and 2 regional cooperation mechanisms. We also have cooperation with international organizations, the United Nations organizations such as UNESCO and UNESCO, as well as UN Women. So just a little bit of examples of our activity in genders and inclusivity. We have the Underwriters Laboratories ASEAN US Science Prize for Women since 2014. And for this year, we have the theme of artificial intelligence in health and safety. There are 2 categories for the senior scientists and young women scientists. So far, since 2014, we have 8 winners, applicants, more than 250 countries participated. Of course, this is for ASEAN, so 10 ASEAN member states, and institutions participated more than 60 or 70. And in October, we're going to have the winners announced for this category. Another activity that we just initiated last year is the Women in STEM webinar since 2021. So usually we have a training for women scientists, but because of the pandemic, we have the Women in STEM webinar series. But we are so happy to see that a lot of women participants, and in fact, men participants as well, joining this Women in STEM webinar series. We have different topics. So the last one that we have is in August. It's on the rising women leaders in digital technology. The next one in November, it will be on the AI application in digital transformation. And so far, since 2021, more than 500 participants. The registration itself may be more than 1,000, but the participants that came to the seminars, more than 500 participants, and they provided a lot of inputs to the challenges and how we should improve the women participation in STEM in ASEAN. And the speakers and participants, not only from the academia or from researchers, we also invite academia and speakers from businesses, including startup, government, as well as community. And at the end of 2022, we hope that we can provide a policy brief on how to strengthen the gender equality and social inclusion from this webinar series. And we hope that we can continue this Women in STEM webinar series virtually, because actually we see animal from a lot of people to this STEM webinar. So some future collaborations that we hope we also interested to expand our collaboration with the Science and Technology Association in the Arab world. Thank you for the invitation once again. And we are interested to explore the interdisciplinary research and technology development, as well as globalization and networking. Of course, we can always use the advantage that now ASEAN has sectoral dialogue partners of Turkey and United Arab Emirates. And definitely, we also interested to strengthen our cooperation with UNESCO and TWAS. And I just put down over here the two possible collaborations that can also incorporate our gender mainstreaming and social inclusivity, including science diplomacy and water management. And actually, I took this from your presentation, Peter. Thank you so much, and looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Narita. Appreciate your talk about ASEAN and ASEAN roles to actually increase the diversity, inclusivity among all in science. Alrighty, so now let's go to the first question. I think I would actually ask Dr. McGrath first. Interestingly, you mentioned about the IAP, about physician society, okay? Because of my background as well, I noticed that there are disconnectivity between clinical research and basic research, basic scientists. A lot of the times, clinicians are focusing on the clinical practice alone, while the basic research focusing on, fancy ideas. But when they try to translate it for applications in clinical practice, it just flop. So there need to be, like communication between clinical research and basic research somehow. How do you think that we can increase this interdisciplinary research, communication, etc., to increase more participation from the physician, from the chemists, biologists, physicists, to make something that, expedite the process, more applied for medical purposes, for example, and other biotechnological advances, etc., rather than, doing it in silo. How do you think that IAP and other physician societies can actually, like integrate with other disciplines in science?
Okay, I think that you've hit on a universal struggle, if you like, that not only in the medical sciences, but also other areas of technology, perhaps, is transferring results from the laboratory to the practice. In many ways, I know the European Union has been discussing this for many years. It looks at America, which does pretty well with startup companies and turning ideas into products and into profits, whereas other countries, other regions are not so effective. What does America have that the other countries don't? Is perhaps first of all, a concept of taking risks with money and putting their money into hopeful ventures. So the venture capitalists are maybe more present there. There is also a very large sort of scientific community, and the university structures are also designed also to help this process. It's been a long time since I was in a sort of research position, but I worked in the UK and in America. In the UK, certainly at the time, I'm talking about the late 80s, early 90s, they were just beginning to set up an office for sort of technology transfer. So it was sort of early days around then. I hope it's been successful since then in the institute I worked for. But really elsewhere, I can point also to a project by our network of African science academies, NASAC, which is really promoting sort of interdisciplinary research, trying to get the young researchers into a room together every now and again and exploring opportunities together and thinking outside the box, understanding different areas of work that might not come natural to them, but knowing who to contact or what exists and knowing it's out there can really be the sort of the catalyst, if you like, to getting these ideas off the ground, especially in countries where the scientific community perhaps is not so extensive as in others. You know, who do you call on? You've got an idea, but you're not sure if it's going to work. So creating spaces for that networking, I think is a way to go, and maybe what Vani just mentioned, something like the ASEAN Young Scientist Network can be something like a forum, a meeting place for these idea exchanges as well.
Thank you, Dr. McGrath. Okay, next, I would like to go to Dr. Narita. Given that in Southeast Asia and Asia in general, I believe that in Indonesia, for example, the Philippines, Malaysia, we also have a lot of Aboriginals people and people in poverty that have difficult access to education, let alone, science, technology, mathematics, engineering courses. I'm just wondering, how does ASEAN actually tap into this problem? Is there any diplomacy between countries to actually increase the opportunities for these underrepresented groups, for example?
Yes, thank you, Siti. I think for education, it's more towards the work of senior officers of education. So it's called SOMED in ASEAN Secretariat. And I believe there are some actions already taken for the underrepresented groups, especially after the pandemics. Of course, there are now increasing gaps between the have and not really fortunate groups. So there's some guidelines, for example, on how to improve education systems post-pandemic from this sector. For our sector, for our senior officer group in science, technology, and innovation, we have some initiatives that are working towards the countries that are less developed, such as Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos. We have scholarships for them, and it's provided by more developed countries towards these groups. Not so much on the women and youth groups, I would say. But for the education sector, I'm sure they have several activities that involve, I believe, UNESCO, as well as the ASEAN University Network, on how to do several fellowships, scholarships, as well as the guideline that's just published this year. I hope that's explained a little bit. And there's another also framework that we work on. It's called ASEAN Recovery, ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. That's also involved the education sector, because you know a lot of children actually drop out, and for these science, technology, and innovation, sometimes it's not considered as one of the priority when you already have like an increasing number of dropout students during the pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Narita. And then I would like to actually, open this questions to both panelists. Okay. How do you see that, like all these challenges, biggest challenges for, developing countries, for ASEAN, for example, and developing countries that was actually managed and overlooked into? How do you actually see the diplomacy to increase, scientific community, scientific publication? Because Dr. McGrath mentioned earlier that, some developing countries, even 2.4% publication, that's low. So what are the challenges, and how do you actually try to convince these developing and underdeveloped countries, or even developed countries, to actually boost this scientific advancement from publication, from research, from number of students involved, more interest from people? Any comments from you two?
Well, let me go first on this one, if I may. There's a sort of vicious circle, if you like, here. Let me talk of Africa for a moment. There is an agreement going back a number of years now between the African ministers of science and technology that they will dedicate 1% of their GDP to science and technology, or research and development, whatever, however we call it. Something like 20 years on, only Egypt and South Africa are even close to 1%, not yet quite touching that level. And many of the other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we're talking even 0.1 or 0.2% of their GDP committed to science and technology. Even 1% is quite low by other countries' standards. We can talk about 2 to even 3% in Europe and the USA and elsewhere. So although there is let's say the knowledge and the sort of commitment from the science ministers that this needs to be done, there always seems to be other priorities. The budget gets filtered off into, I don't know, potentially military, supporting the armed forces. We've just had a pandemic, so that took budgets into the health system, for example, and recovering the economies. But there is always something more urgent than supporting what some countries seem to see as a luxury. But there are also, let's say, economic reports, reviews, studies that show that countries that do invest in their science and technology develop at a faster rate. I mean, one example that is often cited is the example of Korea. South Korea and Uganda had similar sized economies sort of back in the 1970s and 80s, when Korea decided to support its scientific community and invest in science and technology and innovation, whereas Uganda stood still, and Korea sort of zoomed up and is now a high-income country, and Uganda is still a least developed country. So it's a question for awareness in many ways that the scientific community, and this is where our science diplomacy training hopefully has an impact, to make the national governments aware of the importance of science and how science can contribute, if not to the economy, but to science advice on issues like water management, like climate change, like pandemics. You know, the government needs to get that advice from somewhere, and why not its own scientists that it is invested in training and that know the situation on the ground in those countries. And so once the governments, the decision makers see that the usefulness of that advice, then the circle can be completed by saying we need more of this. We don't get enough. We need to make that investment, and we can do much better. So there's a sort of, the links in that circle need to be made much more effective.
Thank you, Dr. McGrath. Dr. Narita, any comments on that from ASEAN perspective?
Yeah, I think from ASEAN perspective, of course, the funding ratio, the GERD, is one of the most important thing that we need to work on. During our ministerial meetings, I think the governments realized that we need to work harder and smarter, I would say, to improve the STI ecosystem in the region. And it's also noted in our meetings that we agree to look into our ecosystem and how to improve that, including, of course, increasing the funding budget for research and development. And I believe, of course, the pandemics, as Peter mentioned, that the priorities focus more on the medical issues and other important things that they consider. But now, after the pandemics are subsiding, I hope that there will be more focus on research and development. And one of the works that we're trying to do in ASEAN Secretariat is to have more collaborations between our more developed countries and with less developed countries in ASEAN. And a lot of projects, including R&D projects, will involve scientists from developed countries and scientists from ASEAN, and we can publish and do a knowledge transfer. At the moment, I think ASEAN Young Scientist Networks is one of the active network that do this kind of global collaboration, along with the Global Young Academy, World Science Summit. That's also involving Jordan, I believe, the Princess Maya, and a lot of international organizations. And the actions or the works that now are undergoing is we're trying to have a strategic recommendations on how to expand our regional research infrastructures. This is actually led by EU, meaning that how can we know there are some scientific research infrastructures around the world, how we can access it, how we can work together. The second one is the Technology Management Hub. This is so the purpose of this hub is how to actually to open up more informations among scientists, among academia and businesses, and how we can work together to do, for example, technology transfer in the next 3 years. So we have some phases that we want to do since last year, and we work closely with some of our dialogue partners, much more developed countries, to learn together. Some dialogue partners also are willing to provide fundings for research and development, such as China, India, and Korea. And we're working, we are very excited to start working on this, and hopefully we can do together also with the open science movement in the world, such that we can work together and narrow the gap. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm just wondering from TWAS and ASEAN perspective again, like we keep on talking about, gender and other underrepresented group, for example, people from different background, developing, underdeveloped countries. But how about disabled people? Because we have a lot of, people of different disability, and their participation in science is extremely, extremely low. Is there any initiatives from TWAS or ASEAN actually to increase their participation to begin with? And because once there are participation from them, then we can actually resolve issues to make, like smart cities around the world, make it a better place basically for everybody, not only for able bodies, but also disabled people. Any initiative from TWAS and ASEAN?
Again, if I may, I will go first. And the short answer is no, nothing specific. But let me point to a couple of things. One is the IAP conference. It happens every 3 years. It's coming up in November. You can register online to view it. It's the 1st to the 3rd of November. The title is Inclusive Excellence. So harnessing knowledge for sustainable societies. And we have a number of sessions, and one of them certainly will be touching on some of these aspects, and I think more than one. So it's not something that we have active programs on, but it's coming to that point in the discussions, and then we'll see what comes out of the other side of the conference and how we might move forward. We also in IAP have an urban health working group, and then you just talked about smart cities. So, the health of urban populations can be quite particular and depends on facilities and open spaces and many things. And that touches a little bit on the smart cities as well. So again, nothing concrete, but I know there is a lot of discussion, and actually there's, for those interested in urban health, there is a conference coming up later in October, I think, out of Valencia, ICUH, the International Conference on Urban Health, and I'm sure they'll have sessions also dedicated to disabilities and so on.
Great, thank you, Dr. Narita.
Yes, I think it's similar to ASEAN. There's no specific action on the involvement of disabled people in STI, but we do have some discussions also going on among the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. So we have ASEAN Smart Cities Network, and they're discussing on how to improve facilities for disabled people. Mostly for science and technology and innovation sector, we are focusing more towards women and youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Narita. Oh, okay, we are running out of time. Maybe I can just pick one of the Q&A mentioned earlier. Is the training for Women Global a available? Can anyone join? Someone actually asked that. Dr. Vanina Rita. The training for women global that you mentioned earlier. Can anybody join it?
Oh, you mean the for women in STEM training? Yes.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's not being implemented because of the pandemics, but in the past, it is open only for ASEAN member states. So, but who knows, maybe we can expand the collaboration and invite more people to together with ASEAN. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Maybe
you.
just to add to that, if there is time, my colleagues here at TWAS, we have a program or an organization for women in science for the developing world that offers PhD and postdoc opportunities, but largely for what they call science and technology lagging countries. So not every developing country is eligible, but they are. You'll find OWSD is the acronym. You'll find the website.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Dr. McGrath and Dr. Narita. Oh, yeah, I guess it's time out. Yeah, we're done for today. Thank you very much for your sharing. Appreciate your contribution to this talk, panel discussion. Yes, and now I believe that we better, stop here for other people to join different sessions. Thank you very much again. See you some other time in different session conferences, etc.
Thanks for the amazing session.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for attendees. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.